1 Corinthians chapter 10. Paul's really continuing his same line of thought from the previous chapter. He's developing it further. And he starts in the first 13 verses by giving the Corinthians an example from history, an example from the Old Testament. He says, our fathers were all under the cloud. That's the cloud that they followed in the wilderness. The sea, they passed through the sea. That's when they left Egypt. And Moses parted the Red Sea and they walked through it. And at walking through it was like their baptism into Moses. They were underneath Moses' leadership. And Paul never talks like this anywhere else, baptized into Moses. So this is just his own way of saying that they were under Moses' leadership. But what is the point of this? What he's bringing them back to Egypt, to the wilderness for, is to show them this has really always been the case, guys. So y'all have been brought out of darkness, and now you're in Christ, and you're in the light, and you're a church. But the spiritual reality does not necessarily align perfectly with how you're living it out. So the spiritual reality does not align with the temporal or the physical reality. You've been given a privilege of communing with Christ, as the Israelites were given the privilege of walking with Christ. And notice, Christ is present in the Old Testament, which shows his eternality. It shows his incarnate presence. In the Old Testament, when you see God appearing to people, the Lord, it's always Christ. God the Father is never said to have a body, but Christ has a body when he comes to earth. And it could be that he was in that same glorified body that he gets after the resurrection and the ascension in the past. So that might bend your mind a little bit, but God is immortal, eternal. He's always existed in his present form. He's immutable, meaning unchangeable. Nothing's ever changed in God. Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. And just as he will go on into eternity from our perspective in the future, because God is outside of time, he goes back into eternity in what we would call the past. But there is no past, present, future to God. He is. He sees all of time at the same time. So Christ was there with them in the past. And though he was with them in the past, they still messed up big time. They had this spiritual privilege of communing with God through the manna that he would allow to fall from heaven, just miraculously, and from the water that would come from the rock, which he says was Christ. Yet, they didn't possess the deep communion with God. They took it for granted. They abused it, and they turned to be immoral people, and they turned to be doubters, and they tested God, and they grumbled about him. And so just because you have Christ, or have the privilege of being in a church, or maybe even you're saved, and you have that possession, but you don't live it out. And really, your possession is eternal life, so your eternity is fixed. But what about here and now? What about the rest of your years here on this earth? You have the privilege of walking with Christ daily, being near to him, loving him, being loved by him, being used by him for a greater purpose than yourself. Do you walk in that? And that's really what Paul is getting to the bottom of here. Though they had Christ to walk with, they did not, period. So they were overthrown in the wilderness because of that, just as the Corinthians are being overthrown right now in some of their behaviors. Now, he says in verse 6, the reason these things took place was so that people in the future could learn from it. And here it is. We're learning from it. What were the sins of the Israelites? Idolatry, worshiping gods other than Yahweh. Immorality. When Moses came down from the mountain and they had made a golden calf to worship, there was sexual immorality going on. This was an orgy. It was a feast. It says verse 7, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. That's a euphemism for sexual immorality, gross sexual immorality. It was so bad that 23,000 fell. God killed 23,000 of them through the serpents and through a plague. So they were putting Christ to the test. We must not put Christ to the test. That's another sin. Immorality, idolatry, putting God to the test, and grumbling. Those were therefore sins, and we must learn from that. We must not do those things. Now, it happened for our instruction, and now we see that we're in the end of the ages. So we're in the last days. We're the last chance to get this right. So let's get it right. Verse 12 and 13, you should highlight and memorize. Therefore, let anyone who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. If you think that you can't be overtaken by evil, you need to think about Peter, who also thought he could not be overtaken by evil, and then he denied Christ 3 times after walking with him for 3 years. No one is above falling into any kind of sin. You think you're good, and that's when you will be humbled by your own sin. Verse 13, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful. He will not let you be tempted beyond your ability, but with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape that you may be able to endure it. So notice, first he says he will not let you be tempted, so you think you're living, God's disconnected, someone tempts you, then God intervenes and throws you a rope ladder. But he doesn't say this. He says he will also provide. So God provides the temptation. He provides the way of escape. Now, James says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. So in one sense, God does not tempt you to sin because it is your own sinful nature that desires the sin in the first place. But God is sovereign over every action in the world. So he, of course, lets you walk into temptation. He ordains things in your life that you may be strengthened and tempted in a certain sense. But it is not ultimately him. It is your own sin that desires to go after what is before you. So you got to reconcile that. And I think it reconciles perfectly. It makes perfect sense to me. So there's always a way of escape. And your first line of defense against temptation is prayer. Maybe your second line of defense is, why do I want this? What am I doing? Why did Christ die for me? You just think about things that are right and true and good. And you will have the strength, the grace that you need to walk in holiness and to not be tempted and to not give in to the temptation in this way. So we must flee from idolatry. Now they had we're still in real idolatry today, but they had like actual pagan worship happening back then that we needed to flee from. Now our idolatry is more spiritual. So idolatry is anything that you place above God. One of my pastors, Pastor Chad, he does biblical counseling, and he discipled me for years. to get me to a place where I could actually be a decent Christian. And he always says this about idolatry. How do you know if it's idolatry? Well, are you willing to sin in order to get it? Or do you sin if you don't get it? So basically, when there's sin in your life, like, ask yourself, is this idolatry? Is this something I think I can't live without, and I have to have it? Then that's idolatry. So that's the idolatry we need to look out for in our own lives. Now, the next few verses, all the way to 22, he starts talking about the Lord's table, eating the body, participation in the blood, participation in the body. So he's saying, if when you eat and drink at the Lord's table, Lord's Supper, that's participating in the body and blood of Christ. You're aligning yourself. You're communing with Christ. Then when you do that with pagan rituals, you're aligning yourselves to demons, because the gods that they worship don't exist, but they're just basically demons. And so you can't do both. You can't over here drink the Lord's table and eat the Lord's table, and then over here drink their table and think that you're not going to provoke the Lord to jealousy. So don't do that, is what he says. They're naive. They're thinking that those gods don't exist. It's Satan. What does this mean to us? Well, there's just worldly things. Let's take music for an example. There's a lot of worldly, secular music. And you think, well, it's just music. And that is true. It is just music, period. However, that doesn't mean that it's not significantly affecting your worldview and philosophy if you're not taking every thought captive to Christ. There are so many songs that are basically worship songs, although they're secular. And what are they worshiping? Oh, just their girlfriend or whatever. Well, that's like worshiping Satan, because let me give you an example. The other day I was just kind of cruising around on Spotify, listening to some Tori Kelly, and she's such a great vocalist. And I was like, I wonder who a good male vocalist is that could rival her. So I was looking for a good male vocalist, and I'd never heard of this guy Benson Boone or whatever, but he's super popular. He's like a Bruno Mars. And so I looked up his most popular song. It's called Beautiful Things. He said, I found a girl my parents love. She'll come and stay the night, and I think I might have it all. And I thank God every day for the girl he sent my way. So he's thanking God for providing to him this girl. But I know the things he gives me, he can take away. Look, it's true. God gives and takes away. I don't know what God he's talking about. He may be talking about the Christian God. That may be in his mind. I'm not sure. But look at how it turns in the chorus or whatever. But there's no man as terrified as the one who stands to lose you. Oh, I hope I don't lose you. Please stay. I want you. I need you. Oh, God, don't take these beautiful things that I've got. And so this man is essentially thanking God for providing him an idol that he can love. But we know it's an idol because he's so afraid that it will get taken away from him. And that's how we treat idolatry. We would sin in order to get our idols, and we'll sin if we don't get them or if they're taken from us. And that's his terror. You should not be terrified if God takes something from you. You should trust his sovereign hand. But all this man wants is for God to provide for his needs, to give him what it is he wants, which is not Christ. And so I said this to our leadership team, which I sent it out to. How sad that the beautiful things that he's asking God for keep him from the most beautiful thing. And that's what idolatry does. Is it keeps us from God ultimately. It promises us things and then ends up taking it all away in the end. Because we have it and we actually realize it doesn't fulfill us. So anyways, to end the chapter, he repeats what he said earlier in the book, in the letter. All things are lawful, but he says not all things are helpful. He's reiterating this. He had already said it. But he adds this in, but not all things build up. And that's the point here. So what should we do about all this? Stop taking part in worldly things. Instead, ask yourself what builds up. That needs to be your focus. There's liberty. You have the privilege of not being under this very strict law. God says to love others, or love him with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love others as yourself. And the rest is, you're pretty free. But what should your focus be? Always to build up. Instead of self-seeking, you want self-giving away. Let no one seek his own good, he says, but the good of the neighbor. You have a liberty in your Christian life, and that's good. But it shouldn't come at the expense of someone else's faith. So he says, if you're eating a meal with an unbeliever and there's meat offered to sacrifice and nothing is said about it, then enjoy it. But once he says, oh, this was offered in the temple, you say, oh, well, I can't eat that. Why? For his sake. Because he knows it's wrong. You know it doesn't matter. But he knows it's wrong. So then when you eat it, he's like, oh, wow, Christians don't care about being right. Even though he's ignorant. We still need to live for the sake of the other, not for our own self. I mean, just think about that perspective. All I care about is me. And I'm free to do it, so I'm free to do it. That's just selfish. Don't think about you. There's no life there. Think about others. That's where purpose comes in. That's where, like, living as a Christian, where the rubber meets the road. Sure, you can do this and that. But is that building anyone up? Your whole life should be focused on building others up. So you have to exercise discernment in these things. Just think about your life, all of the secular side of your life. We all have a spiritual, maybe a sacred side, the things we do at church and with our Christian friends, explicitly Christian. That's great. But we all have a secular side because we all live in the world. And Jesus says, be in the world, but not of it. And so when we're in the world, in the secular side of our lives, what are we doing in that realm that is meant to build others up? How much of it is self-gratifying and how much of it is for others? The shows you watch, the events you go to, the concerts you go to, the music you listen to, etc. The sports you play, the hobbies you have, the groups you're a part of, whatever it may be. Are you doing those things for yourself? Do you have this little niche carved out to exercise Christianity? And then as soon as you're done with that niche, you come back over here to your life and it's just self, 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 self? That's backwards. You have no witness if you do that. No one's going to look at you and say, I want to be like that person. And if you start discipling someone, it'll get found out real quick because you realize that you're very selfish and that you don't actually have a lot to offer them. So why do we do all this? Verse 31, this is another highlightable verse. You should memorize this. Whether you eat or drink or watch TV or go to football games or do sports betting or drink alcohol or go to restaurants or throw parties or go on vacations or join a fraternity or buy a vehicle or buy a house or get married or have a kid or go on a missions trip or do this or do that, whatever you do, it's not for you. It's meant to build up. Or in other words, as Paul says here, do it for the glory of God. What brings God glory? When you stop thinking about yourself and think for the sake of Christ, his church, namely in the form of other people. Build others up. That's why Paul tried to please everyone in everything he did, not seeking his own advantage, but that of many. Why? That they may be saved, and saved not just in salvation, but then continued in sanctification, which is holiness, which is multiplication, that they can turn around and disciple others. And he says in 11:1, which belongs to this chapter, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. So think on these things. I know I gave you a lot to think about. I gave myself a lot to think about. I got a lot of driving today to do today, that I'm going to get to meditate on these things. And so, I'm grateful for you guys, and I'm praying for you that this podcast, this book, these letters really help you love the Lord Jesus more.